What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Phenomenal Student Podcast. Today, I'm going to be doing what I'm going to call my first version of Talking Tuesday, maybe Talking Thursday sometime. So it kind of maybe in the form of kind of an op-ed. So the topic today is Let's Teach Literacy. So, of course, I'm just going to be opining like on the current landscape of literacy. I do a podcast. I'm not going to say that like I'm some expert who's been around for 20 years or has a doctorate behind his name, but I am somebody that has an experience as an educator. So I like to share that from my perspective. And maybe those listening can share their perspective after the fact and we can kind of get a discussion going after the fact. So I'm going to lean back into my sports writer bag and kind of get this discussion going like I like to. All right. So before I get started, really on just my solutions and different things I think should happen, I could just go into my history as an educator. So some of these things would be more talking about pedagogically, some of the things that I was doing, not even realizing I was doing the right things early in my career through me dealing with the different versions of literacy and people's opinions on it and how they can be about it. So that's something I've articulated to people before, how people really can be. So let's get to it. All right. So let me just talk about my career. So the first 2 years, school I was at was a bit more on the what we call the drill and kill method. So that means pretty much test taking, make sure kids did well on tests. So that was really our focus. So that's pretty much what I got very good at. ABCD, getting kids, drill and kill, do all those things. Especially my first year, that's kind of really what I got indoctrinated into. That doesn't mean we didn't do any other components. I think you maybe did a little bit of guided reading, different things like that. I kind of knew what reading levels were kind of for the most part, but that was the focus. All right, so let's move forward to my second year. That's probably a bigger focus with what I would like to touch on. So before that year, I read this book called The Reading Zone. I come to find out, I mean, honestly, I was just reading books. I didn't know anything about different forms of literacy, what was important, anything like that. So this book called The Reading Zone, I come to find out it was more of like a balanced literacy type approach. And they were really about choice in that particular school. Let kids have choices of what they want to read. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna put a focus on that, and that's been my focus ever since then. I don't level out books. I don't do anything like that. I just let kids read what they want to read. And I try to be smart and let them read certain things that's probably more within their level sometimes, because sometimes they go a little too high and sometimes too low. All right, so coming into that year, I had an area called the Phenomenal Zone, which was kind of an homage to that, like the reading zone, the phenomenal zone. And my zone is called Mr. Short Zone. And I've always had my own teacher bookshelf and then mirrored the students bookshelf. So I was like, I read, you read. So I've always had a big focus on that. But that particular year, still was doing a little bit of that drill and kill. But what I didn't realize is that I kind of really started engaging in a lot of high quality literacy practices, probably without even realizing it. I knew some of them were taught to me by my phenomenal literacy coach at that time. But one of the things I noticed at the end of my first year is that my kids weren't fluent. We come to know was SR, different things, that's a big focus. But a lot of my kids were tier 3 in that area according to the diagnostics. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do fluency. And I would send it home and put a real big focus on that. And I later come, that's repeated reading. And that's a high, very, 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 very high effect size. So I started doing that. And I had kids that were reading 200 words per minute by the end of the year. And many were reading definitely something. And I taught fifth grade, just for context, 100 words per minute by the middle of the year. And some 130, 170, all that good stuff. But of course, their performance went up as well. A lot of those kids were doing well on assessments, different things like that. So some of the things, even I've looked back now, I had kids doing student-led core reading. The students were leading it. I started trying to do some different things with my grouping. So I kind of was tinkering a little bit on that. And so I was doing a lot of class discussion. So a lot of these are high quality literacy practices that at the time I probably didn't realize the overall effect size of it, which I'll get to at the end. All right, so let's go with keep going with that. A lot of my kids struggle with info text. That was something I started to discover. So what I did was this thing from ReadWorks called Article a Day. I started having them do that every day and review it every day. Now I come to find out now, hey, that's a high thing. That's a big effect size because you're giving kids that background knowledge. That's good for. They would review it. So of course, student led. So those expectations, different things like that. So all those things I was doing was great practices. I've always been great knowledge to students, motivating them. That's like my jam. So all those things, these high effect size, I was engaging in all these things that were actually, but I didn't know the why. And like I said, I'll get to that at the end. That'll be one of my solutions and one of the things I talk about. So ultimately, my kids did end up doing quite well on the start of that year. They ended up getting 91%. I think it was like 64% proficient, maybe only about 25% mastery. So they had a pretty good year. Now, after that year, I decided to move to a different school, different district, and people roll a little different. So I didn't know much about, again, preface this, about all of this, how reading is taught and how people feel about it. But I found out very quickly. My first indoctrination to that was that I know something they introduced us was this thing called the Units of Study, which I come to find out is created by one of the four mothers, I guess you would say, of the balanced literacy movement, or initially code language, Lucy Calkins. And when I looked at it, I was like, no, that ain't for me. Like, I already had high performance kid, could read, all the good stuff. So I always put a heavy focus on that. So I still kept with my same focus. I've always been a big more of I was a whole group person. I didn't know anything about small group instructional block. I did small groups doing RTI or something like that, but I never did a whole group thing where you actually would do small groups doing the whole group. So I didn't know anything about that. But some people feel that you should do that. So that particular year, kids were doing well in reading and writing. Definitely in 85%. One test hit 90. So they were kind of ticking up. And this is the first half of the year. So they definitely would have got better as we got closer to the state assessments. And, probably one troubling conversation I had that year. And I was telling her, like, hey, my kids are performing. They're doing this. And they're like, well, you need to do more groups. I'm like, what? I mean, at the time, I really didn't 100% know what they were talking about. I was like, I don't get the logic behind this, because, hey, the kids are performing, they're reading. Like, they love reading. I'm trying to figure out what the issue is. But later I come to find out, people, when you have kind of like that philosophy that you should do it this way, that's how they're going to click. So, okay, the kids did well. By the middle of the year, most of the kids met their growth measure according to MAP growth. They jumped in their reading level, so it matched up with MAP growth. So all of it matched up. So moving forward, I actually ended up working second grade. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, I flat did not want to work that grade level. I was trying to get out of it up until the day that I started working second grade. I didn't want to deal with the babies, all that. Check this out. They ended up being one of the best years of my career, as far as, especially inside the classroom, as far as academically, what those kids were able to do. They're probably my strongest bunch of kids, and things like that. So I'm just tell you about some of the things I created that year. And then honestly, I became a better educator, because you had kids that were dyslexic and different things going on, varying needs at the second grade level. So like I said, I'm informing y'all of this background. It's a little long-winded, but I think it's important toward this informing these decisions on this current landscape. So I'm probably a perfect test case to this. Those particular students, okay. So a lot of things I started doing, I created a word study program, which I've now presented at LitCon 22 last year and received high marks for it. It's been able to help students after that, and even my students last year and this year. Like, it's a program, it works. A great word study program that incorporates phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, reading comprehension, writing, all those things or language, all those things are incorporated within the system, and is built according to a certain rigor matrix. So it's a system that works. Also, during that time, I started really tinkering with my interventions, and what that looked like. Instead of making a traditional intervention, maybe you pull groups and then kids work on little stations or something like that. I made it a 5-part system. So they do something in the morning, they do something, and at that time, and I'm gonna get to this part too, guided reading. They had RTI we had that year. I made sure we did comprehension. But a lot of these things, and then at home, they were all part of an overall intervention system that was based around student need. Again, that year I started experimenting a thing called Daily Six, instead of the Daily Five. I did have the Daily Five, where it's based around what the National Reading Panel said kids should have every day. So I kept up with my minutes every day, as far as if I incorporated all these components, and then I added writing. Really, I need to add, I'm thinking about going back to the classroom, adding technology to that. So I kept with my minutes as to what you're doing. I even have a template I have that I can share with others. Going with that, I did do guided reading. That was a whole core component of it, but it was differentiated, some high, some low, just like typical. Some did mainly phonics. Now, that's a more of a traditional balanced literacy structure. But in a sense, I was starting to essentially experiment with more of a structured literacy model. But I didn't know a whole lot about SR. It wasn't even like a big thing until really the pandemic, which was about to hit that particular year. So that became a thing. So like I said, moving forward, the kids actually did incredibly well that year. At the end of the year, I had 2 students that ended at a T. Mind you, I taught second grade, so I had 2 kids in the year at a 5th grade reading level. I think I had one ended at an S, one ended at an R, and like half of them, I want to say, ended at a Q. I had to go back and look at the metrics or whatever, but I do think it was about half. So many of them ended reading at a 4th grade reading level. And then at the beginning of the next year, they grew 2.4 years according to vocabulary, the word study program. And then 2.0 years. This is on average. It's not like 1 or 2 kids. 2.0 years on average for the whole classroom as far as the year. So they experienced exponential growth using a lot of my systems. Of course, people don't always like that style created all these things. People don't, probably more of the troubling things I heard that year. So that was a rough 2 years of my career. I was engaging in bad practice, but then now a lot of these things are things I've created resources. I've created national presentations off of these things. So you just show you how education can roll, but when people are so set on their way of teaching. So on with that, I'll be honest, at that time, me and the term balanced literacy didn't really mix. Don't mention anything about that at that time. And that stayed that way probably for a good little bit. So there's not like the people that are balanced literacy listening, that was probably more the origins of why I felt that way. Moving forward, eventually I was like, man, I got to get away from this balanced literacy stuff, man. Let me go into intervention. Find out then. So I took about a year, I kind of figured some things out and went back and became an interventionist. And you start seeing that, oh, wow, this is in interventions too. Now, I was allowed to kind of do my thing a little bit, do my way. And I didn't realize my model at the time. Now I'm starting to learn about SOR and evidence-based practices and things like that. I had more of a structured literacy model. But of course, when people are balanced literacy, that's the way they think interventions should be done. We're going to talk about the names of the programs and things like that. You can fill in the blanks there. But I use more of a structured literacy model. Of course, again, my kids had 2.0 years growth in interventions. Those students that I work with, kids moving from H's to O's, I's to P's, like in third grade, like astronomical stuff. So I'm now presenting that at LitCon 23. I'm looking forward to doing that in about 2 weeks. So let's just move forward. So I created a resource called the Playbook, which encompasses my structure of how I do interventions. So, I mean, honestly, I would love maybe go back to the classroom and see how that mixes in there. But again, so I was able to have a lot of success and still having success this year. So I'm looking forward to showing the world that. So I'm bringing y'all up to speed, just letting you know as far as on my career and how things are, like these different practices I've engaged in and the success I've had. So I've had things where I've merged balanced literacy concepts, but I do lean a little bit more towards structured literacy. So that kind of leads to, and I'm sorry, I'll be looking at some of this stuff a little bit. Here. So I have some notes over here now because I want to touch on everything. So like I said, it's a little long-winded, but of course we're talking about literacy in education. So again, I'll say I'm a bit more moving into what I really want to talk about. I'm a bit more in line with SOR as far as the approach, evidence-based practices or structured literacy, whatever you want to call it. I'm a bit more aligned with that. But at the same time, I do believe there's a place for both components of both. Now, I ain't saying one approach, but components of both and what they're saying. So the thing is, one of the things I kind of, and this is more speaking to the balanced literacy people, that they favor that approach. One of the things I've heard, and I had multiple guests, they feel like SOR is trying to force people to follow a script and do certain things. But I would tell those people that as somebody who's dealt with it, and most teachers have dealt with this on the local level, you're kind of forced to follow a balanced literacy structure. Like if you don't, people gonna have an issue with it. You do have to deal with that. So why are you doing it differently? And then even if you're getting results, they're going to be like, no, you can do it the balanced literacy way. Trust me, I've dealt with that throughout my career, the last 3 to 4 years. So I've dealt with it. So I just want y'all to truly understand that y'all people may be hassling about it nationally on Twitter and different things, but at the local level, they have to deal with that until all this SOR stuff kicks in. And as I told people before, that's why you're getting pushback as far as people want to use SOR because they've been dealing with balanced literacy for years. Just being honest, that's what it is. Now, going with that, I would tell both sides that locally, a lot of teachers don't know anything about this stuff. They're not saying they're dismissive or anything like that, man. They're just doing what they're told. So I think y'all have to be real about it. Y'all hassling over it, but they're the ones having to deal with it. They're having to take these tests, do these academies, and do all these different type of things. And all it is an extra box to tick for them. They're not, like I said, not saying they're bad educators. It's just the reality of the situation. So of course you have time to deal with it, but they don't. So there's just something coming down the pipe. So, but I'm gonna get to why, I think all this stuff is important. So like I said, they should care. But I do think what I don't like is the idea of telling people what they do and can't do. Something about that don't feel right because I've been there with somebody who was telling me what I shouldn't do or can't do or anything like that. So even though I might agree with one side, it just don't feel right to be start telling people what they can and can't do. So I think people have to be very, very cognizant of that. But there are certain things I flat agree with. 3QM model, we cannot be doing that. Like, I'm sorry, people, it's just not where it. I'm an interventionist, and I've seen where kids look at pictures and kids say it's a tiger when it's a cat. Like, I've seen things like that. So we got to break these practices. Like, it should be just whatever band, whatever you want to say, that's just whatever. So it's just a lot of things. Kids reading these long books and the teachers never reading it and asking for the conferencing and different things like that on books they never read. Like, it's just things that, like, you got to not do these things. Like, it's just not where it's at. Kids need to learn skills. I do believe in choice when it comes to books. I'd rather them read. So there's a lot of things that, okay, phonics need to be explicitly taught. That's just the reality of the situation. Not like, oh, you believe in this approach and teach them as you, no, they need to be taught these phonics skills. I've seen as an intervention, when you go according to a progression, it works. Sorry, it just does. So it's not even, you ain't got to be the best, the most skilled person. I'm still learning. And when you go according to a certain progression, it works. All right. So let's add to that. Now, again, like I was saying about these trainings and having teachers do things, like I've seen teachers who now, you have a lot of this information is a lot to absorb, where you're having to do SOR, do this or that. A lot of this stuff is stuff they need to absorb. Like when it comes to both sides, when it comes to SOR and evidence-based practice, that takes years, and some people probably 45 years to really understand what they're dealing with. It took me a few years. You're giving them these scenarios and things they should do in these scenarios, they have not faced it yet. Like it's one thing to sit there and look on the screen, another thing you got kids in front of you. You have to learn how to manage a classroom. Then you want to learn oral language, phonics, phonologic, phonemic awareness, learning unvoiced, voiced, all these different type of things. That stuff is hard. So it's like you're talking about years of training to do this. But on the flip side, balanced literacy is the same. One of the things I've heard is say it take a couple years to become a skilled balanced literacy teacher. But I'm like, hey, sometimes people ain't got a couple years, so your students got to struggle that year. So like, what can we come to a middle ground? What works for like where kids can be successful that year while teachers are also still learning? So it's like, and I've always told people, well, one of the things I say is that you have to be very skilled to be skilled at balanced literacy, of course, as a, be successful in that particular method. But there's still a peak. I do feel there's a peak when it comes to balanced literacy as far as student success. I feel they get capped. I feel like they don't grow the way they to the level that they can because of certain reading level things, and they're not doing things at their level. So that's just my opinion on that. But I'm not saying balanced literacy is bad. It's just my personal thoughts on that. Now, there are resources I feel that really help for those who want to know about using either both approaches or knowing how to really teach reading. I feel it's some guys I've interviewed from Tim Brzezinski, Chase Young, David Page. I'm probably forgetting the name. Artfully Teaching the Science of Reading. I think that's really good. It's another book, Shifting the Balance. It kind of talks about merging both approaches. And another book that I recently read and got sent an advanced copy of. It's really not a reading book per se. It's more of a book that kind of gives you lessons, and that's the Reading Strategies 2.0 book. General Saravala, she's been a guest on my show twice, and not me pumping her up because she's been on the show, but her book is really good as far as I feel like merging both approaches. She kind of, and she at one point I think was more aligned. I guess she would say with balanced literacy with the Reading Writers Project, but her book is sound. So don't get caught up on the fact that who she was aligned with or anything like that. Her book is sound, has a lot of research to every lesson. And even as an interventionist, I've started to look at a few of those things and started to look at it. I think people should really like look at that. That book will be a great resource. Find it on Amazon, of course, on the Heinemann website, everywhere. So I would really recommend that book. Now, let me get to the solutions of things I would like to see. I think that really can help. Again, I'm only 7 years in, so I only have so much thoughts on it as far as But all I know, I'm an educator, so these things I think we should see happen. I think people should be accountable. So regardless of whether you SOR or you balance literacy, I think you need to be accountable. Because I've seen some of these resources and you ask people like, hey, where's the research that shows that this is effective? What is the performance metrics on this? And you can't find it. You find a couple studies here and there. Some of these things have been around for 10, 15 years and there's barely any studies on it. You're like, wow, what's up with that? Like, why are there no data to back up that what you're doing is works? And the only people that have done a study is y'all. Nobody's come in as an independent person and done a study on what you're doing. So I feel like that should be a yearly thing, seeing how your stuff is either staying the same, even if it's performing and doing well as a system, or if it's some downward trends, you should always keep a peg on that. So I would say mostly be accountable. So and don't get upset when somebody says that it's not the best overall, but because it's stuff on both sides where you say people like, okay, it doesn't have the highest effect size. Maybe we shouldn't use this for this. So like be accountable to that. Everybody should be. You shouldn't be trying to skew the data to show that what you're doing is great. All right. So my second thing is let teachers be them. Now look, I might seem real chill here, but I'm like super high energy. I like jumping on tables. I like doing all that stuff. So, even teaching reading while I was teaching math, I'm like a high energy person. Not all the time. Sometimes I'm modeling and doing things like that, but I can be very high energy. So I like to be allowed to be me. So I want others to be allowed to be them. So that's something I'm very big on. So I'm not saying I understand what is SR and balanced literacy, but a lot of people that teach, they get results of what they're doing, let them do it. I know you have district this, you have campus this, you have that. you're going to get the best results when people are allowed to show their personality. So, and then if they're more, say, a more balanced literacy person, they get results with it. Why are you questioning? Like if they get results, you get performance on state tests, anything like that. Kids are reading, they enjoy coming to school. Let them do it. Now they doing bad stuff, yeah, correct it. But at the same time, let people do them. So that's one of the things I would say. Like let people be them. So that's one solution is that. And then finally, let's come together and have a discussion. Like everybody's doing everything in silos. They have their conference. We have this is a SOR conference. This is a balanced literacy conference. I'm basically this year been to a multilingual conference. I'm about to go to the balanced literacy conference, and then I'll be going to a state conference that is a bit more, I think, seems very more SOR aligned. So I would just say, man, let people be them, and let's come together and have a discussion. I mean, I would invite anybody from both sides to come on the podcast, or if you want to go somewhere else and do a discussion, that's fine too. But I would invite anybody from both sides. We can get together and have an actual discussion so we can make decisions that are the best for kids. So that was one thing I would just say at the end, because we do need to like come together to come with a solution. At the end of the day, like it's affecting kids, of course, the teachers, but it's affecting kids the way these things are being taught. We need to come up with what's the best solution so these kids can read. No matter what color, ethnicity, whatever, make sure all the kids can read. So remember that we're all the same squad, or we should act like we're the same squad. Collective teacher efficacy is one of the highest effect sizes. And again, that's teacher literacy. Make sure to share this, give feedback, share your own solutions. Thank you for listening. This is Mr. Short. I guess my first Let's Talking Tuesday. Let's teach literacy. Peace out.